All right, I will say good morning. Beautiful daf ahead of us today. Beginning by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors, the Daf Yomi Shiur, for dedicating the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Mr. Milton Marder, Mordechai Dovid ben Rephael HaKohen Zichron Lebracha. To thank the Elbaum family for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kopel ben R Avraham Menachem. To thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Shirley and Alan Steinmetz, and Allison and Adam Steinmetz, commemorating the shloshim today of Sherry's father, Adam and Allison's grandfather. The neshama should have an aliyah. To thank, okay, it's interesting, our Daf Yomi sponsor today, an anonymous sponsorship in honor of someone's birthday. Okay, I'm guessing whoever that is knows who they are, but that's unless this is a typo, but that's the information I have. Good. And Matt and Diane Marks for dedicating the shiur today, memory of Sylvia Marks, mother of Matt Marks, and Mirz Hashem. All of the neshamas should have an aliyah, and the families a neshama. I will say with that, let us begin. So again, let's get started. So we'll say today's daf is Peivav, 86. And we are picking up in Mirz Hashem on Pei Hey Amud Beis 85b. And we left off Ella Amrafuna. So we'll say we are 2, 4, 6 lines up for the bottom. So we'll say, so just to reorient ourselves a little bit. So if you remember again, we had a Mishnah. All good things start with a Mishnah. Remember again, so what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah spoke about the following situation. That if a woman made a neder and she said, Konam she'ini osa picha. Right, Rachel's married to Ruvain, and Rachel says to Ruvain, Konam, I make a neder, I'm not going to give you any benefit. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So we had an interesting three-way machlokes in the Mishnah. Tanakama says, what does Ruvain have to do with such a neder? What does he have to do? 0. Why? Because essentially she's making a neder to uproot an already existing obligation. And as we've already established, if you make a neder to uproot an existing obligation, it doesn't do anything. That was the Tanakama. Rabbi Akiva said, no, Reuven should go ahead and annul the neder, should be made for the neder. Why? Because Lamaisa, the only part, there's what she's obligated to provide him, and then there's what's called hadafa. The neder, the additional amounts. Technically, the neder could devolve upon the additional amounts. So therefore, you should be made for the neder so that it's not chal, it doesn't take effect on additional amounts. Good. But we're focused really on the third position, which is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. What did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, Yafer shema yirgashena v'tihi asura alav. So this is very interesting. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, here's the dynamic. Here it is. Rachel makes this neder. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri agrees with the Tanakama, namely, the neder doesn't take effect now. Doesn't take effect. Why? Because Rachel is obligated to go ahead and do certain things for Ruvain. Right? So therefore, the neder doesn't take effect. What is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri concerned about? That should one day they get divorced, the neder would take effect. I will say, this goes back to what we said before, because remember, again, I will say the distinction between hafara in Nedarim of Inui Nefesh versus Dvarim, bless you, Beino lebeina. What's the fundamental distinction? When a husband is made for Inui Nefesh, how long does that hafara last for? Forever. Dvarim Beino lebeina, only when? When they're married. So there Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, right now the neder doesn't work. But Lamaisa, should they get divorced, the neder absolutely could take effect. So therefore, you should be made for it, lest it take effect when they get divorced. Comes along Shmuel, just a very quick chazara. Comes along Shmuel, and Shmuel says, the halacha like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi say, the fact that Shmuel says the halacha like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri also seems to solidify another concept, which is Adam makdish davar shelo bali olam. That a person could go ahead and consecrate or sanctify something that is not yet in existence. Not yet in existence. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's whole chap is annul the neder now because of something that may occur in the future. Now, has that future occurrence materialized presently? The answer is no. Yet, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is saying you could take action now to go ahead and potentially impact a future or a potential future reality. Well, that sounds like Makdish davar shalav aliyah, that a person can consecrate something that has not yet come into existence. The problem the Gemara says is Shmuel doesn't hold that way, based on another source that we quoted on the top of Amud Beis. So we'll say that's where we're up to now. How do we reconcile these two positions of Shmuel? To which the Gemara says, Alam Ravuna, Brid Rav Yoshua, Ba'omeres Yikanshu Yadai Laosem. Oh, very interesting. So we'll say, what's the case? I'm sorry. Well, actually, let me just tell you. So the case that the Gemara brought up ultimately, again, what the Gemara brought up that posed the contradiction was hamakdish maaseh yedei ishto. That essentially, if a husband went ahead and was makdish the earnings of his wife, so Shmuel essentially said that that this does not work. So what could potentially be a case in which, if we were to look, so now the Gemara says, Ela ba'omeres yikadshu yadei la'osehen. But what's the case in the Mishnah? The case in the Mishnah is where the wife is saying, my hands should be consecrated. The neder that she's making is that my hands should be consecrated. Now what's the chap with saying my hands should be consecrated? Hands are a dvarim sheba'u li'olam. So she's consecrating something that already exists. I understand. If a woman says that my hands should be consecrated, does that work to consecrate her earnings? After all, but at the end of the day, her earnings are meshubad, right? Her earnings are, however you want to translate that, encumbered or owned by her husband. See, even if she consecrates her hands, Lamaisa once was running into the same problem, which is she can't consecrate something that essentially someone else is entitled to. So what's the pshat? To which the Gemara says, the Amra Lechi Megarsha. What is she saying? I'm going to mekadesh my hands ultimately again for when I get divorced. That's fine, but hashta miha lo megarsha. But Lamaisa right now she's not divorced. And first of all, who says that works? They'll say, let's now we're going to switch gears for a moment. Listen how the Gemara is framing this. The Gemara now is saying that perhaps this is a case where the woman says, my hands should become hekdish, so to speak, which also, what does it mean when you make your hands hekdish? What that means is you're being makdish your earnings. So just understand the gadlus of that. The gadlus of that is you're being makdish something that exists. So now this is now no longer a davar shel bali olam because it's the hands, right? But what you're doing is you're being makdish it for a future state. So she's essentially saying my hands, i.e. my earnings, should become hekdish if and when I get divorced. To which the Gemara says, does a statement like that actually work? What's the problem? Both say, take a look, top of Pei Vav, Amar Rav Ila. Shabila says as follows, listen to this. It's actually a very interesting case. Uma ilu Amar Lechavero, Sadazu Shani Mocher Lecha, L'she'ekachena Mimcha Takdish, Milo Kacha. So listen to this case, Rabbi saying. Imagine the following scenario. Ruvain is selling a field to Shimon. So what happens? Ruvain says to Shimon, this field that I'm about to sell to you, when I purchase it from you, when I purchase it back from you, takdish. So we'll say, here what's happening over here. Ruvain's selling to Shimon, and Ruvain's telling Shimon, after I sell it to you, I'm going to buy it back from you. And upon buying it back from you, this field should automatically become hektish. Okay, that's the condition he's making. Now I will say, the Gemara says, Milo Kacha, doesn't this work? Right? Doesn't this work? So the Gemara says, fine. So I will say, so now listen to this. So Milo Kacha, I will say, so now what's happening? So why is the Gemara bringing down this case? So the Gemara wants to suggest that Lemaisa, isn't this the same thing as the woman's case? What is she saying? She's saying, right now my hands should become hekdish upon divorce. So okay, the Gemara says, does this work? Well, it sounds like it should work, because after all, why is this different than the case of Reuven selling a field to Shimon, and Reuven says to Shimon, right now I'm selling you the field, I'm going to buy it back from you. And when I buy it back from you, it should become hekdish. So the Gemara says, no. Maskif Rabbi Yirmiyah, mi dami, you cannot compare those cases. I'll tell you why. Sadazu shani mocher lecha, hashta biyadehi. I will say, here's the very big difference. Right? In this case of Reuven and Shimon, right? Who's currently in possession of the field? Reuven. Right? Remember, I will say, what's the case? Reuven is currently in possession of the field. He's getting ready to sell this to Shimon. He's saying, Shimon, I'm going to sell you the field, and guess what? That's step one. Step two, what am I going to do? I'm buying it back. And when I buy it back, the field should become hektish. So I will say, I could hear that could work. Why? Because Reuven is making a tanai regarding something that what? He currently owns. He currently owns. So even though now the item is going to be leaving his possession, but he currently owns it, he's already planning to re-own it, I understand why that could work. So the Gemara says, Isha, biyada lahaktish ma'aseh yadeh. But I will say in the case of the woman, right, going back to the Rachel case, what did Rachel say? Rachel is currently married to Reuven. What is Rachel saying? These hands should become hektish when I get divorced. What's Rachel say? Who, so to speak, owns the rights or the ma'aseh yadayim of those hands right now? Who owns them? Who owns them? The husband. Right? So in other words, she's trying to make it time. I will say, but I just want to be clear, obviously, the husband doesn't own his wife's hands. When we speak about ownership, we're really talking about entitlement to certain earnings. But the way just we phrase it is the owning of the hands. So therefore, again, the Gemara says over here, so here, Rachel's trying to make a Tanai, but at the time she's making the Tanai, she does not really have full control over her earning powers. So because of that, maybe she can't make the Tanai. So in other words, what the Gemara is suggesting is, maybe the only time, it's actually very interesting, maybe the only time that you could legislate a future reality is when? When you have complete present control. But if you don't have complete present control, you can't start making conditions about future realities. So the Gemara says, Halo Dami, so you're right, maybe the Rachel case is only comparable to the following. Halo Dami, Elali Omer Lechaveiro, Sada Zu Shemacharti Lach, or Shemacharti Lecha. Supposed to listen to this. Maybe it's compared to the following case. Reuven selling the field to Shimon. But in this case, Reuven already sold the field to Shimon. He sold the field to Shimon, right? And Reuven now says to Shimon, that field I already sold to you. When I buy it back from you, it's going to become hektish. So the Gemara says, Mikacha, does that work? And the answer is, it doesn't work. The answer is, it doesn't work. Now, I will say, why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it work? Because at the end of the day, at the time that Reuven is making the Tanai, what does he lack? Any sense of ownership or control over the field that he's trying to manage. I will say, just to understand, what is Reuven trying to accomplish? Right? You're asking yourself, that's an excellent question. I have absolutely no idea what he's trying to accomplish. So I will say, what he's trying to accomplish is like this. He sold the field to Shimon. He's going to buy back the field to Shimon. For whatever the reason, right, what he wants is the moment he buys back the field becomes hektish. He doesn't want to have to deal with that process, buying it back. He wants to put in place a process that is going to be triggered immediately upon the repurchase of the field. So he says, so again, step one, Reuven sold the field to Shimon. Step two, while Shimon is the current owner of the field, Reuven says to Shimon, when I buy it back, it will become hektish. Step three, Reuven buys the field back from Shimon. The halacha is Rabosai, the field is not hektish. In other words, Reuven can be maftish it if he wants, but what is it going to require? What is it going to require? His action. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that Allah Lamaisa, when something is not under your complete control, you don't have the ability to legislate a future reality. And I will say this would seem to be comparable to the case of Rachel in the previous case, where she's married to Reuven, and now at the time of marriage, she says, when I get divorced, or if I get divorced, my hands should become hektish, so to speak. It would seem to be based on what we just learned. What would the halacha be? It does not work. Why? Because she does not possess current control over those earnings. So says the Gemara, Maskif la Rav Papa. So Rav Papa says, 1 second. Midami, still can you compare the cases? Listen to this. Gabi Zvina, Psika Milsaihu, Gabi Isha Mi Psika Milsaihu. To which the Gemara says, they're very, very different cases. We'll also take a quick look at the Rush. The Rush is in the right hand margin, like right in the middle of the margin, right in the middle of the Rush. So middle of right hand margin, middle of the Rush. Gabi Zvina Psika Milsaihu, She'in lo ba lo guf v'lo peiros. See, I will say, in the field case, at the time that Shimon owns the field, what rights does Reuven have in the field? What rights? None. I will say you have no rights in someone else's property. So Reuven has nothing to do with that field. He has no rights. So that makes sense that he can't go ahead and make a condition that says, when I buy back the fields from you, Shimon, the field is going to become hektish, because he has no hold on it. However, again, Gabe Isha mi psika milsa. So the Rash says over here, Haguf hu shela ela shemeshubad labal maisi adeha hilchach yichol lakisha. So we'll say, listen to this. In the case of Rachel, we'll say, does Rachel own her hands? Does Rachel own her hands? Yes, of course. Right? In other words, no one ever owns the hands of another human being. And he says, so the hands of another Jew. So we'll say, so Lamaisa again, Lamaisa, the Gemara says like this, in the case of Rachel, maybe Rachel does have the ability to make a tanai about the future state of her hands, because Lamaisa, unlike the field case, where Reuven has nothing to do with the field, no rights in the field, at the time that it's sold to Shimon, a woman always has rights in herself, even at the time of marriage. So maybe she does have the ability to legislate some future reality regarding the status of her earnings. That's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, when it comes ultimately to a sale is absolute, and therefore Reuven has no rights in the field when it comes to Shimon, when Shimon owns it, and therefore maybe that's the reason why Reuven doesn't have the ability to legislate any future realities. I will say, by the case of the Isha, even when Rachel's married to Reuven, so even though Reuven has rights, right, Rachel still owns her own body. Right, Rachel still owns her hands. So Lamaisa, maybe she does have the right to legislate future reality. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Halo dami ella. It's only comparable to the following case. Listen to this. Eli omer lechavero. Sadazu is very interesting. Sadazu shemashkanti lecha lecheshe'efdena mimcha takdish. So we'll say, now listen, a little bit of a switching gears over. It's very interesting. So we'll say, rather the Gemara says, comparable to the following case. Reuven borrowed money from Shimon, and what did Reuven do? He collateralized a particular field, right? So he collateralized the field. So now Shimon has that field essentially as a pikadon, as a collateral. So watch this. So what does Reuven say? So we'll say, now remember again, not our sugya now, but a very interesting one to discuss about the rights of a creditor in a pikadon, in collateral. So in other words, let's work under the assumption that a creditor almost becomes a quasi-owner over collateral. So watch this. So now Reuven borrowed money from Shimon. Reuven collateralized his field. So now Shimon has that field as a pikadon, as collateral. And Reuven says, that field that I collateralized to you, when I redeem it from you, what does it mean when I redeem it from you? What does that mean? When I pay off the debt, and I get back full unencumbered title to that field, takdish. The field will be consecrated. So the Gemara says, Milo Kacha, that works. Shabbos say, this is actually a good case, because this actually sounds like it's comparable to the case of Rachel. Why? Because Shabbos say, the case of Rachel is a little bit like a collateralized field. How so? What's the chap with a collateralized field? Right? Shabbos say, one person has ownership, but one person has like title, but another person has what? Rights. So that almost sounds like a little bit of like the marital arrangement, right? So in other words, Rachel owns herself. She owns herself. Husband has rights to certain earnings. And yet we see that in this case, if Reuven were to make this condition, right? So Reuven's field is presently collateralized to Shimon. And Reuven says, my collateralized field, when I pay off the debt and I get back full and clear title to the field, or full and clear rights to the field should become Hagdish. That sounds like it works. That kind of tonight should work. Well, if that's the case, then Rachel should be able to what? Rachel should be able to say, when I get divorced, my earnings should be Hagdish. To which the Gemara says, no. Maskef Rav Shisha Rav Idi. No, it doesn't work. I'll tell you why. It's not a good comparison. Me dummy. Listen to this. Me dummy. Sad biyad lifdosa. It will say, who controls the process of decollateralizing the field? Who controls that process? Reuven. Right? Reuven control. How does he control that process? Paying off the debt. So in other words, it's totally in his power to go ahead and regain complete rights over the field. Isha biyadal garish. I will say, does a woman have control over the get process? No. I'll say it's one of the, again, even for those, right, for all of us who of course have complete allegiance and fidelity to halacha, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Torah. One of the hardest things sometimes that we encounter is the level of powerlessness that often a woman has in the get process. Okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his wisdom structure things a certain way that we don't understand. But Lamaisa, the Gemara says over here, that halacha Lamaisa, a woman doesn't have the ability to go ahead and trigger a divorce process. Right? So it's not in her power, so to say. Now the truth is, a woman could absolutely do certain things or not do certain things in order to trigger a divorce, the need for a divorce. But lamais, at the end of the day, the bottom line ability to be divorced is a v'nasan biyada. Right? Husband has to give her the get. So lamais, the Gemara says it's not comparable. It's not really comparable. In other words, conceptually it's comparable because both the collateralized field case and the married woman case are both a case of where individuals own title but other people have rights. Right? But Lamaisa, they're dramatically different because in the case of Reuven's collateralizing the field to Shimon, Reuven could decollateralize it any moment he can by paying off the debt. So that's why perhaps now he has rights to legislate future realities regarding that field. But an Isha, a woman, doesn't have the ability to control what the future status of being married or divorced is going to be. So perhaps Lamaisa, if because of that, she doesn't have the ability to legislate future reality in her current state. To which the Gemara says, "Hello, Damya." So what is it comparable to? "Hello, Damya." Ella lo omer lechavero sadazu shemashkanti lecha le'eser shanim. It's very interesting. Lechashe'evdena mimcha taktish. So I will say, listen to this. You have this interesting case. I don't know if it's interesting. I don't know if contemporarily this happens. Person collateralizes a field for a certain amount of time. Right? So I will say, this is actually very interesting. So Reuven essentially collateralizes a field to Shimon for 10 years. Do people do this? Stuff like this happen? Collateralize something for a certain amount of time? I don't know. All right, whatever. I'm sorry? Mortgage. Alone for a particular duration. Okay. Oh yeah, mortgage. Oh, mortgage, right. Good, okay. So, I should get out more. Okay, so Lamaisa, listen to this. So now what's happening over here? Reuven collateralizes a field to Shimon for 10 years. So I will say, now what's different about this case? There's a duration. Now, the chap over here in this duration is, during the 10 years, Reuven can't touch the field. Right? In other words, the way this is structured is that Lamaisa, during the 10 years, that's the way this is structured. Reuven can't decollateralize it. Right? So that's it. It's yours collateral for 10 years. So now what does he say? What does Reuven say? After 10 years, so Lamaisa on the field should become hektish. And the Gemara says it works. So this should be comparable to the case of a woman, because she also has kind of the same thing, which is for a certain amount of time, however long it is, right? For a certain amount of time, she's not going to have control over her earnings, but at the moment she does have control over her earnings, she chooses to be maftishit. To which Nabo said, this one you can anticipate the refutation already, to which the Gemara says, it's not going to work. Maskif Ravashi mi dami, of course it doesn't. The comparison is not good. Hasam kayitz isha mi islekitsusa. I will say, no, we saw that one coming already from a million miles away, which is, the comparison is not good. In the case of the field, the duration is quantified, right? So again, I understand, so Reuben said for 10 years he can't touch it, but the Maisa, what do I know is happening after 10 years? What do I know? It's reverting back to him. So it makes sense that because he knows something, there's going to be a defined reality at the end of 10 years, it makes sense that he could then say that what? In 10 years from now, the field will become hektish. By an Isha, by a woman, ultimately, again, there's no defined duration. If you look at the Ran, last two lines of the Ran says again, Midami hasam kaitz gabi sada ika kitsus lifdosa. Right? In the field, there is a duration in which she'll be able to go ahead and redeem it. Or whatever, eser shanim. Lahachalo kaitz, last Ran, gabi Isha, less like kitsusa, the shemalo tiskarish. I will say there's no defined duration for the woman because maybe she will be divorced, maybe she won't be divorced. And therefore, hilchach dinhu delo lehavi hektish ki megarsha keven shikdish v'oda tachtav. Therefore, I will say maybe it could be, or maybe it would seem to be, that if she tries to be makdish her earnings now while she's still married, such a statement is not going to work. Ella Amar Bezer will say, Ella Amar Ravashi. See, here we go. I'll say, Ella Amar Ravashi shayni konamos. Dechi kedushas haguf dami. I will say this is absolutely fascinating. Rav Ashi now is going in a totally different direction now. This has nothing to do with Adam Makdish Davar Shabali Olam, Lo Bali Olam. This is something dramatically different. Rav Ashi says Nedarim are different. Now specifically a konam neder. And I will say, what's konam? Remember what's konam? Konam is a kinui. Right? Konam is an equivalent term for what? Carbon, hekdish. So now comes along Rav Ashi and he says konamos are different. Now why are konamos different? Dechi Kedushas Haguftami. This is wild. Because he says making a konam is like Kedushas Guf. So remember again, konam means carbon. Let's pause for a moment. When you make an animal a carbon, I'll say, what happens to the animal? What happens to the animal? It's Kaddish. What type of Kedusha? Kedushas Haguf. It's fundamental bodily Kedusha, which means that the entire body of the animal changes from being a stam animal to suddenly being vested with a heightened level of sacrificial sanctity. So Rav Ashi says, when you make a konam essentially produces Kedushas Haguf, physical sanctity. Now what does that mean? Take a look at the Ran for just a moment. It was a top Ran on Pei Bava Days 86b. First line in the Ran in the right hand column. Amr Rav Ashi, shiny konam is the Kedushas Haguf. Kevin, watch this. Shahare, hein ki Kedushas HaMizbeach. I will say, when you make a konam neder creates almost like sacrificial mizbeach, right? Sacrificial, right? Altar sanctity. So I will say, it's very interesting. When you make an animal, when you consecrate an animal as a carbon for the base of which is a carbon for the mizbeach, such an animal does not have redemption. You can't redeem that. He says, Kach ein pidyon lekonam. So too, if a person makes a konam neder, there's no pidyon, there's no redemption. Meaning what? Shihei muter lemi shene'asar alav. So when you create a konam neder, that isser is absolute. Now I will say, the Ran is not saying that there's not hatara or hafara. There is. But what he's saying is the nature of the isser is an absolute isser without exception. Without exception, the chayvan de konam kedushas hagufu, and therefore, since konam effectively creates kedushas haguf, mafkia midei shibut shehi mishubedes lebal. This is wild. What is it? Rabbi say, right, I'm going to read this in the before we see in the Gemara. It effectively uproots any pre-existing lien, encumbrance, or shibut that may exist. Look, pause here for just a moment. Watch what's happening over here. Konam is effectively, what are you doing when you make a konam neder? You're making a neder that operates on the principles of carbon, which creates sacrificial bodily sanctity. So now watch this. If when you take an animal and you say, right, behema zu ola, what have you done? You've vested the animal with physical sacrificial sanctity. To the point that what? It uproots anything else that was already on that animal, any other identities that were on that animal, and ultimately applies equally to everyone. So what the Gemara is suggesting is like this. When a woman makes a konam neder, that neder employs the mechanism of carbon. What that effectively does is vests her, so to speak, with kedushas haguf. Now, not literal physical sanctity, but physical sanctity to the point that what does it do, Rabosai? It removes any other pre-existing liens or obligations, which would even include who? Even include her husband. Pretty wild. That's the power of a konam neder. Ran goes on, he says, Mafkia mide, it's in the last white line of the Ran, on top, Mafkia mide shibut shimishubedes labal. It'll even uproot the shibut of the husband, the chayo, and therefore the neder will take effect. Umishum hachi, pasak shmok Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, afal gab the svili the shmol, the ein adam makdish davar shalab aliolam. So in reality, Shmuel holds that a person can't consecrate something that has not yet come into existence. You can't consecrate davar shalab aliolam. That's what we're going to paskin. Mishum diyade isha isnu ba'olam, umatzi mikad shalahu bekonam shumafkia midei shibud. Should I both say, this is pretty wild. What we are now suggesting, you hear how wild this is? What Rav Ashi is effectively suggesting is that when a woman says, konam, let's go with the lashon of the Mishnah. What was the lashon? Konam she'eni osapicha. Right? I make a neder, a konam neder, that I can't give any benefit to you. They will say, what has Rachel effectively done in that case? She has made a neder that employs the mechanics of carbon, which effectively creates Kedushas Haguf. Now in this case, what Kedushas Haguf means is an absolute application of the neder to anyone and everyone, including who? Including her husband. To the point that what Shmuel is suggesting, Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler is suggesting, is that if a woman makes a konam neder, prohibiting herself from giving benefit to her husband, it actually uproots the husband's entitlement to her earnings. Wild. Absolutely wild. So I'll say, now watch this. So the Gemara says, back to the Gemara, Amra Vashi, shiny konamos, a konam neder is different. Why? Because again, a konam neder creates kedushas haguf. Now I'll say, again, I just want to be clear. When he says a konam neder creates kedushas haguf, it doesn't literally mean that the woman is becoming, in other words, there's no sanctity on the woman. I mean, there's a sanctity on every human being. But there's no particular, what he means is, just like kedushas haguf is absolute upon the entire entity, let's say originally an animal, so too this neder takes complete effect across the board to the point that it uproots even pre-existing shibudim, even pre-existing entitlements and encumbrances. Rava will say, now this is not a chiddush over here. Rava already says, what Rava said, Dama Rava, hegdish, chametz, v'shichror, mafkiyin midei shibud. So I'll say this is actually quite beautiful. So what happens? So hegdish, making something hegdish, right? Making something hegdish. If you look at the Ran for just a moment, we'll take, these are longer Rans, which also you should look at on your own. But for today, I'm just going to show you just the beginning of each one. You see the Ran, Damara hegdish, it's almost right across in the Gemara, right hand side. Kigon asa shoro apotiki lebal chovo, vikdisho achakach lemizbeach, mafkia also hegdish shibud hamalva. The Govo Mimokomacher. Both say it's a great case. Watch this. Reuven borrowed money from Shimon, and what did Reuven do? He collateralized his ox, and then what does Reuven decide to do? Reuven's feeling very inspired, so what does he do? He's makdish the collateral. Right? He's makdish the collateral. They'll say, what happens when you're makdish your collateral? Something incredible happens, which is the item becomes decollateralized, ultimately becomes fully hektish, and now the creditor has to collect his debt from somewhere else. So what do you see from here? The power of hektish. So I will say, this is exactly what we're saying. When you're makdish something with kedushas haguf, with physical sanctity, that physical sanctity becomes so absolute that what it does is it dissolves any pre-existing obligations. It's wild. So much in the same way that when Reuven borrowed money from Shimon, and Reuven collateralized his goat. Let's use goat as better. What did he use over here? He says, Shoro his ox, right? And now he collateral, and now what he's makdish his ox, this ox should be a korban, creating kedushas haguf. That kedushas haguf dissolves the collateral status. So we'll say similar again, chametz also does this. What happens with chametz? Skip down a little bit on the Ran. Chametz, you saw also chemtu apotiki lo'ovei kochavim. We'll say, listen to this. If a Yisrael, same case, Reuven borrowed money, but in this case he borrowed money from Gentile, right? He borrowed money from Gentile. So what happens? And he made chametz collateral. Apotekim is in a collateral. Apotekai, collect from here, right? He made the chametz collateral. So what happens? Va'avra alav Pesach. Now I will say, now what happens on Pesach? You see, here's the problem. If Reuven still owns that chametz over Pesach, then what's the problem? He's owned chametz over Pesach. That's an Issa D'Oraisa. So what happens when Pesach comes? The Isser Chametz comes along and removes the collateralization, removes the lien. That's what Chametz does. Okay, V'asher ba'ana. So again, the ramifications of that we're going to leave. The point over here is that Chametz is another thing that ultimately removes pre-existing obligations. And Shichror. I will say, what's the case of Shichror? The Ran says, Asa avdu apotiki v'shichroro. Listen to this. Let's say Reuven borrowed money from Shimon. Reuven had an Eved Kanani, a Gentile servant, Gentile slave. And what does he do? He collateralizes the servant, which you can do. Then what does he decide to do? What does Reuven decide to do? He emancipates the servant. Should I say emancipation is so strong that what? That it literally has the ability to go ahead and remove any pre-existing liens. Now, I will say, out of all of these are all interesting. The one that matters to us most is what I will say, hektish. Because what is the Gemara saying? When you go ahead and you're makdish something, the act of physically consecrating, this is with kedushas haguf, the act of endowing something with physical sanctity frees it, or dissolves any pre-existing obligations or entitlements that may be upon that entity. So the same way I will say, so again, in a very simple case, right, I went ahead and Reuven borrowed money from Shimon, gave his ox as collateral, then Reuven is makdish his ox, that kedushas haguf dissolves the collateralization of that item. So too what Rav Ashi is suggesting, that when a woman makes a neder, and the way she makes a neder is konam, which is carbon, right? Ultimately, again, my benefit to you should be like a carbon. Ultimately, again, Rav Ashi suggests that creates Kedushas Haguf, a physical matter, not literal physical sanctity, but an absolute new state in reality which dissolves the husband's entitlement to his wife's earnings. Absolutely wild. To which the Gemara says, here's the problem. So remember again, we're suggesting that this is the position of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. But here's the problem. What did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said that when Rachel makes this neder, the husband should dissolve it, should be made for it, should annul it. Why? Shema Yegar Shena. Because perhaps he will divorce her. But according to what we just said, I will say when Rachel makes this konam neder, when does it take effect? When does it take effect? Right now. Right now. Because that's the power of konam to dissolve, well, it's the problem of hektish, to dissolve all pre-existing entitlements, which sounds like if Rachel makes this neder during marriage, she actually dissolves the husband's right to her earnings right then and there. So why does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say that he should annul it? Because maybe they'll get divorced. Don't do it divorce, do it right now. To which the Gemara says, right, Tani, va'od shema yigar shenu. Ultimately, again, what does it mean? If Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri meant to say he should dissolve it now, because ultimately, again, the neder will take effect now. Furthermore, perhaps he will divorce her. Take a look at the Ran again. The Ran, I will say, is about 6 lines up, 7 lines up from before it gets wide. In reality, ultimately, again, the neder works even now. The neder works now. Because as we just said before, hektish dissolves pre-existing bonds, or pre-existing encumbrances. So the Gemara says, "V'hashnami kadosh tekona mafkia shibudei debal u'l'cheshatin salomar de'almua rabbanon l'shibudei debal boda tachtov dishavua kilokeach gamar v'lo kemalva afilu hachi yofer shema yigashena." See, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is saying is like this. Yochanan ben Nuri is saying, let's say you're going to argue back and you're going to say, no. A husband has a much stronger entitlement than that. In other words, normally, hektish can dissolve pre-existing encumbrances and liens, but perhaps a husband's right to his wife's earnings is so strong that even hektish can't dissolve it. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, still, husband should go and annul that neder. Why? In the event that they get divorced. In the event they get divorced. So Rabbi say, this is absolutely pretty incredible. So what seems to come out from this sugi, Rabbi say, is, like Shmuel said, that we pass like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Therefore, when a woman makes a neder that says, konam she'eni osa lepicha, she makes a neder that says, ultimately again, I make a neder, you can't get any benefit from me. So I just want to point out, the way the Rambam paskins is, halacha l'maisa, a husband does not need to annul that neder right now. He doesn't have to. Why? Because l'maisa, his entitlement cannot be undone by her neder. That's how we paskin halacha l'maisa. But the Rambam says, we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, like Shmuel said, he should annul it. Why? Because it's dvarim shebeino lebeino. See, though the neder won't take effect now, when will it take effect, or when could it take effect? In the event of divorce. Okay, so I'll say that's the core halacha. But along this journey, we pick up a number of other very important nuggets. Number one, we paskin ein adam makdish davar shel bali olam. You can't consecrate something that does not exist in this world. Now, we'll say furthermore, we do paskin like the statement of Rabbah, namely, normally hektish, chametz, and shechrar do have the ability to dissolve pre-existing bonds. Now, not the entitlement that a husband has to his wife's earning. That can't be dissolved even by hektish, but lamaisa, it dissolves almost everything else. So if there's an encumbrance that exists, and you're makdish that very item that has the encumbrance upon it, it dissolves the encumbrance. Or if you have chametz that's encumbered, and then Pesach comes, Pesach dissolves the encumbrance. Or you have a servant or an Eved Kanani that is collateralized, right? Ultimately again, and then what? And then you free that servant, that collateralization ultimately again is dissolved. So we paskin like Rava, but Rava's idea does not apply to the entitlement that a husband has to his wife's earning. I will say, it's also interesting to note that if you look at this Gemara, Rava's statement has profound hashkafic implications as well. Right? Hektish, chametz, and shechrer, mafkiyin midei shibud. These items have the ability to remove something from shibud. I was saying, we all suffer from shibud. Right? What do we suffer from shibud to? Shibud to the Yetzer Hara. right? Often I'm enslaved and ensnared by the Yetzer Hara. Right? I just simply, I do so much good. I try to accomplish so many good things, but often I find myself within the clutches of my wants, of my desires, of my passions, of my proclivities. And Rava says, there are 3 things that can help you with your Yetzer Hara. What are the 3 things? Number 1, Hekdesh. Infuse more Kedusha in your life. Infuse more Kedusha in your life. That's what Hekdesh is. In other words, I will say, sometimes what I just have to do is I have to up my game. Right? There has to be more Kedusha. However that's going to come. More learning, more tzedakah, more chesed, better, whatever it is. Whatever your Hekdesh is going to do, but there has to be more Kedusha. Number 2, Chametz. I will say, what's Chametz? What's Chametz? Chametz is the Yetzer Hara. So I will say, what do we do with the Yetzer Hara? You got to stay away from it. You see, in life, I have to create protective fences for myself. You see, if I put myself constantly in the face of temptation, if I do not create protective boundaries for myself, I'm going to fail. No person is beyond temptation. No person, right? No, literally, no person is beyond temptation. So if I don't create the proper protective fences for myself, I'm going to fail. That's chametz. And number 3, shichra. I will say shichra represents, so protective fences is one level. Shichra, I will say, then is the process through which I actively free myself of the things which are holding me back. You see, sometimes in life, I know the things that are holding me down. I'm just unwilling to let go of them. I'm unwilling to let go. And if I'm unwilling to free myself of the things that are holding me back, I'm going to constantly be enslaved to Yetzer Hara. So we'll say, isn't that incredible? Rava, not just teaching us a halachic concept, but teaching us a hashkafic concept as well. There are 3 things that ultimately are able to free you from the shibud of the Yetzer Hara. Hekdesh, put more kedusha in your life. Chametz, create for yourself protective barriers. And shikhr, identify the things that are holding you back and find the courage to finally let go. Mishnah, Nadra ishto b'savar shenadra bito, a man goes in and makes a neder. Very quickly, right? A woman makes a neder, and a husband thinks that it's not his wife who made the neder, but it's his daughter who made the neder. Or Nadra bito b'savar shenadra ishto, or his daughter made a neder, but he thought it was his wife who made a neder. Or Nadra Shabbos, in this case, he's confused about the identity of the person who made the neder. Or Nadra b'nazar v'savar shenadra b'karban. Or she made a neder, wife made a neder to be a nazir. He thought she made a neder to bring a karban. Nadra b'karban v'savar shenadra b'nazir. Or ultimately, again, she made a neder by karban. He thought she made a neder to be a nazir. Or Nadra miteinim v'savar shenadra b'na'avim. She made a neder not to eat figs, and he thought she made a neder not to eat grapes. Or Nadra b'na'avim v'savar shenadra b'na'ateinim. Or she made a neder not to eat grapes. He thought she made a neder not to eat figs. Harize yachsu b'yafra. Well, in all these cases, Mishnah teaches us that halacha l'maisa, if you get confused about the identity of the person who's making the neder, or you get confused about the subject of the neder, your hafara doesn't work, and you need to make a new hafara with clarity on the vower, clarity on the subject. Shkoyach. All right, Chavran Zoom, have a great day, everyone. I'm sorry? It's confused a lot of the 1.5 speed people. Yeah. I'm capable of doing it at speed also.